Dr. Buttram and I had the honor to see her very shortly before she passed. Her transition was quick, and waiting to guide her across the threshold was her mother, Mrs. Franklin, Reverend Emerson Clymer, Dr. Posnecker, and Gloria. Let us send her our loving thoughts as she makes her transition back to her heavenly home. In this morning's sermon, we continue our discussion on the 7 Habits book, and we're going to discuss habit number 3 today, Principles of Personal Management. Goethe said, "Things which matter most never should be at the mercy of things which matter least." Habit 3 is the personal fruit, the practical fulfillment of habits 1 and 2. To review using our computer analogy, Habit 1 says that you are the programmer. Habit 2 says, write the program. And Habit 3 says, run the program, or live the program. In other words, Habit 1 says, you are the creator, you are in charge. It empowers us to say to ourselves, that's an unhealthy program I've been given from my past, or from my social mirror. I don't like that ineffective script, and I can change. Habit 2 is the first, or mental creation. It is based on imagination, the ability to envision, to see the potential, to create with our minds what we cannot at present see with our eyes. It is the deep contact with our spiritual paradigm of the great work and the vision of what we can become. Living Habit 3 is the second, or physical creation in our lives. It is the fulfillment and actualization of Habits 1 and 2. It's the exercise of our independent will toward becoming principle-centered. It is the day in, the day out, minute by minute, hour by hour, doing it. It is the great work in action. Habits 1 and 2 are absolutely essential and a prerequisite for habit number 3. You can't be principle-centered in your daily life's actions unless you develop your proactive nature. You can't be principle-centered in your daily life's actions unless you have a vision and a focus of the vision that you have for your life as a whole. However, with the foundation laid in the first 2 habits, you can become principle-centered, day in and day out, moment by moment, by practicing effective self-management. Habit 3 is self-management, and it follows personal leadership, habit 2. Leadership is primarily a high-powered right brain activity. It's an art based on philosophy. You have to ask ultimate questions of life when you're dealing with personal leadership issues. However, once you've obtained the answers, you then have to manage yourself effectively to create a life congruent with those answers. Self-management is then the breaking down, the analysis, the sequencing, the specific application, the time-bound left brain aspect of effective self-government. Mr. Covey summarized it as follows: manage from the left, lead from the right. Now, to review our mission statement from last month's sermon, the mission statement in the great work is as simple and as follows. First, the spiritual attainment of individualized soul consciousness, and then, secondarily, success in the material affairs of life that better both ourselves and humanity at large, the win-win scenario. This requires the power of an independent will. Effective self-management is made possible by our independent will. It is the ability to act rather than be acted upon, to proactively carry out our life's program. It is not the dramatic, the openly visible, the once-in-a-lifetime, up-by-the-bootstraps effort that brings enduring success, but the little decisions that we make every day. Effective self-management is putting first things first. Our self-leadership decides what first things are. It is self-management that puts them first day by day, moment by moment. Management is discipline. Discipline derives from the word disciple. Disciple to a philosophy. Disciple to a set of principles. Disciple to a set of values. Disciple to an overriding purpose. If you're an effective self-manager, your discipline comes from within. It is a function of your independent will. You are a disciple, a follower of your own deep values and their source. more importantly, you have the will, the integrity, to subordinate your feelings, your impulses, and your moods to those values. The successful person has the habit of doing things failures don't like to do. They don't necessarily like doing them either, but their disliking is subordinate to their strength of their purpose. This process requires independent will, the power to do something when you don't want to do it, to be a function of your values rather than a function of the impulse or desire of any given moment. Time management versus self-management. Mr. Covey tells us in his book that time management is a misnomer, as the challenge is not to manage time, but to manage ourselves. He divides time management activities in our daily life into a 4-quadrant matrix based on 2 factors, urgency and importance. Urgent matters are ones that are usually right in front of us, pressing us for immediate action. They are often popular with others. They are sometimes pleasant, easy, fun to do. But many times, these in-our-face urgent things are not important. We tend to react to urgent matters. Importance, on the other hand, has to do with results. If something is important, it contributes to your mission, to your values, to your high-priority goals. Important matters are not urgent, require initiative and proactivity on our part to feed them to our benefit. We must act to seize opportunity, to make things happen. If we don't practice habit 2, if we don't have a clear idea of what is important, of the results we desire in our lives, we are easily diverted into responding to the urgent but not important. This grid can be broken down in a little bit more detail. Quadrant 1 activities would be those that are both urgent and important. These tend to be crises in our lives, very pressing problems, and deadline-driven projects. Quadrant 2 is important, but not necessarily urgent. These are things that increase our production capacity. They can be relationship building, recognizing new opportunities, exercise, healthy eating, long-range planning, healthy recreation, and most importantly, our spiritual practices, breathing, reading and studying, cultivating silence, communing with nature, the practice of transmutation. Quadrant 1 activities are important and urgent. Quadrant 2 activities are important but not necessarily urgent. Quadrant 3 activities are urgent but not important. They would be interruptions, telephone calls, some mail, meetings, popular activities, again, that are perceived as urgent but not necessarily important. Quadrant 4 activities are neither urgent nor important. Trivia, busy work, time wasters, pleasant activities, and sometimes destructive behaviors. Reactive, ineffective people live their lives in Quadrant 1 crisis management. However, this quadrant tends to get bigger and bigger until we can't take it anymore, and we run to escape to Quadrant 4, pleasant, sometimes self-destructive behaviors that are neither urgent nor important. Reactive people thus spend 90% of their time in Quadrant 1 crises and 10% into Quadrant 4 escapism. They spend no time at all in Quadrant 2, the important but not urgent. Proactive, effective people do what they can do to stay out of Quadrant 1 and 4, and do all in their power to spend time in Quadrant 2. Quadrant 2 is the heart of effective personal management. It deals with things that are not urgent but important. Quadrant 2 activities are usually those things we know we need to do, but somehow seldom to get around to doing them, because they're not urgent. Another way to look at this is to paraphrase a quote from Peter Drucker. Effective people are not problem-minded, they're opportunity-minded. They feed opportunities and starve problems. Sounds like transmutation, doesn't it? Opportunities lie in Quadrant 2, problems lie in Quadrant 1. Now, whether you're a student at the university, a worker in an assembly line, a homemaker, a fashion designer, or a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, your effectiveness will increase dramatically by cultivating Quadrant 2 activities. Your crises and problems will shrink to more manageable proportions because you would be thinking ahead, working on the roots, doing the preventative things to keep situations from developing into crises in the first place. The Church of Illumination has always taught living in Quadrant 2 message, but in different words. The church teachings tells us that when we find ourselves in a Quadrant 1 crisis or problem, do not bemoan our fate in self-pity, but analyze it in a very objective way. Look for any lessons in the problem or crisis, and look for opportunity to learn and grow from the problem or crisis at hand. In this manner, we will meet head-on each and every challenge in our life, face them in the spirit of the great work, and consequently, they will pass away, one at a time, and we will grow exponentially. Now, to stay in Quadrant 2 requires us to say no. And that's what Goethe was hinting at in the quote we read in the beginning. I'll repeat it. Things which matter most must never be at the mercy of things which matter least. We need to say no to things which matter least to stay with those that matter most. Living in Quadrant 2 and doing this is not easy. All the other quadrants try to pull us out of the most important Quadrant 2. It is almost impossible sometimes to say no to the popularity of Quadrant 3 activities, or the pleasure of escapism to Quadrant 4 activities, if you don't have a bigger yes burning inside of you to keep you in Quadrant 2. The enemy of the best is often the good. The enemy of the best is often the good. This means we often have to say no to some good things in Quadrant 3 and possibly Quadrant 4 to obtain the best things for ourselves in Quadrant 2. Only when you have the self-awareness to examine your life and the imagination to create a principle-centered program to which you can say yes, only then will you have the sufficient independent will and power to say no, with a genuine smile, to the unimportant in your life. It takes moral strength to say no when you're trying to stay in Quadrant 2. Those around you will not understand. However, we should cultivate the backbone to say no firmly and with finality. You have a great duty to yourself, and yes, to serve others. But we can often best serve others by prioritizing our Quadrant 2 activities instead of saying yes to Quadrant 3 and 4 requests from others. Remember, putting priority to Quadrant 2 is a self-management activity which always follows self-leadership. In this regard, Mr. Covey asks us, what one thing could you do in your personal and professional life that, if you did it on a regular basis, would make a tremendous positive difference in your life? The answer to this lies in Quadrant 2. Our effectiveness takes quantum leaps when we do them. And I boldly answer that the most important Quadrant 2 activities are those that feed the soul. The Nazarene tells us about Quadrant 2 in Matthew chapter 16, verses 24 to 28. Then said Jesus unto his disciples, If any man will come after me, let him deny himself, and take up his cross, and follow me. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, and whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. For what is a man profited if he gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? For the Son of Man shall come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he shall reward every man according to his works. Verily I say unto you, there be some standing here which shall not taste of death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. What are some of these Quadrant 2 spiritual activities? I think we're all aware of them, but let me repeat them for completeness' sake. These are the Quadrant 2 activities that are food for our soul. The arcane schools of the great work have recognized time management as self-management for centuries. It is for this reason we are taught that only a total of 30 minutes per day are actually required for our Quadrant 2 spiritual activities. The breath. In the air we inhale is truly hidden the fire of life, which comprises of many diverse forces. In ordinary breathing, these spiritual forces are inhaled and then exhaled without becoming part of the breather. The secret of absorbing and retaining the higher spiritual forces in the air is desire and will. If we breathe deeply and consciously, as taught to us, we energize and build our spiritual body, which makes us more effective in our personal physical life. Activity number 2, reading and studying our lessons and books as given to us by the church. Number 3, cultivating silence, as it is in silence that God and the hierarchy speak to us. Communing with nature, gardening or hiking, if done in the spirit of communing with God's creation and beauty, and surrounding ourselves with uplifting classical music. These are all very simple, very easy Quadrant 2 activities that we can incorporate in our daily life to improve personal effectiveness. The great work has espoused 4 cardinal words that imbue the habits of effective living as outlined by Mr. Covey. And these 4 words are to know, to will, to dare, to keep silent. To know is habit 2, self-leadership. Self-leadership means doing the right things. We first must know what the right things are. By studying the lessons and books of the great work, by listening to and learning from the sermons and interpretations presented during our church services, we are practicing habit 2. We are cultivating self-leadership in our spiritual and physical life. To will is the desire and determination to implement our self-leadership paradigm in our daily life. To will means that habit 2 is not just some lofty ideal or dream, but that one has a burning yes desire to activate and implement it in our daily life. To will enables us to cultivate habit 3, self-management. To dare is the courage to proceed and execute without permitting anyone's interference to live your spiritual mission in your daily activities. It is the courage to stay in Quadrant 2. Keep silent is nothing more than demonstrating your spiritual conviction by actions, not words. It means to refrain from boasting, arrogance, and attempting to convert others to your way of thinking. It is humility in action. To summarize, Mr. Covey has elucidated 3 personal habits that, if practiced and implemented, will dramatically enhance effectiveness in our personal lives. The first habit is to be responsible for our actions and to be proactive, not reactive. The second habit is self-leadership in deciding what are the right things to do in our life. This is to know. The third habit is self-management, or doing things right, with efficiency and more effectiveness. The end result is a self-management paradigm that places priority on Quadrant 2 activities that increase our production capacity and spiritual growth. It takes a proactive person to keep daily emphasis on Quadrant 2 activities as much as possible. The reactive person will be overwhelmed by Quadrant 1 crises and constantly be dragged into Quadrant 3 and 4 less important events and activities. It also takes a clear self-leadership that encompasses a burning mission inside of them to desire, and a strong independent will and courage to sometimes say no in order to stay focused in Quadrant 2, to dare. All stand for the benediction. May the divine consciousness shine upon us and overshadow us as we leave the portals of this temple this day. May the divine light within us shine ever so much brighter, becoming in deed and in truth a lamp unto our feet, and a beacon in the darkness for all those who are groping for the light. Amen, amen, amen. Peace be with you.